No, what are you talking about, mate? We cannot have people gathering unless Black Lives Matter. But aside from that, people cannot gather more than, 20 now? I went to that bloody protest. It was mental.
So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about was the protest video that you just uploaded this week, last week for people watching this now. Now, you uploaded that maybe Monday, Sunday, whenever that was.
Monday.
It's got millions of views. How has the response been on your side? If you could take people who haven't seen it through what happened.
It's funny. So basically, I just rocked up there and do what I do. That's the best part of my job, where I go to rallies and I go there with a couple of questions that, the idea of it is to show that all these people that go to these rallies generally don't know the most basic thing about what they're protesting. And it works every time because they don't. And, some of them are good people and they're just misguided. But, on the weekend we had whatever it is, 40,000 people, they say, that gathered in Melbourne to protest this, George Floyd thing. And they were breaking COVID-19 restrictions. So really, putting, if you believe it's a risk, which they're all the same people that a few weeks ago were condemning those little protests against the lockdown because it's so dangerous. So if you believe it, so you're willing to put millions of Australians at risk. So it must be pretty important and you need to do it right now. But you go there, you ask them basic questions like, do you know Justine Damon, the white Aussie chick that was also murdered by a cop, by a Minnesota police? None of them even bloody know her name. Then they start throwing statistics at you like, oh, what about the 432 Indigenous deaths in custody? And it's like, all right, how many white people died in custody at that same time? Guess what? It's about 2,000. But that doesn't matter because, what about the incarceration rates of Indigenous people? It's like, okay, guys, what are they in jail for? You want to lower incarceration rates? Do you want to stop jailing murderers, child rapists, actual domestic violence? This is the craziness and they don't know anything at all. So I went there and I put those basic questions to them. And what's interesting is I've looked at the statistics this morning, the analytics, and it's about across the platform. So Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and it's got about 4.5 million Australian hits. So if you think of that, that's 1 in 5, 1 in 6 Aussies have watched at least 10 seconds of that freaking video. And it hasn't made it to the mainstream media. Not one. That is the most watched Black Lives Matter footage in Australia, but the project don't run it. And why is that?
That was a question. The answer to that...
Because I look better than Waleed.
Waleed will never give anything to you. The thing is, they refuse to run things like that. Now, they have been doing that for the longest time. If they don't recognize what you do as real journalism, they don't recognize what I do as real entertainment. And the reason they don't do that is because
they're right about the latter.
Thank
You're
you.
not fucking funny, bro.
Thank you very much. They don't do that because it threatens them. It threatens everything that they hold dear. And they know that if you start recognizing Avi, who's out on the streets asking questions, hard questions, as soon as we start recognizing him, all of a sudden it boosts his profile and he takes our spot. And they refuse to do that. Now, with the Black Lives Matter movement, and particularly the Indigenous deaths in Australia, one of the interesting things that came out was a link to, I don't know if it was the Australian Bureau of Statistics or it was the crime statistics, whoever does that for the government. Those 400 plus Indigenous people who died between 1991 and I guess it was 2018.
I think those stats are between 91 since the Royal Commission and 2016 or 17. Yeah.
So a large percentage, over half of those were
58%.
58% were natural deaths.
Natural deaths. 37%. 37% are drug and suicide. So overdoses and suicide. Then there's 5% remainder which are external injuries, right? And that's mostly, and you're talking about 432 deaths over 20, almost 30 years. So the 5%, you're talking about one every couple of years that came from external injuries, which is punch-ons in jail, there is maybe 1 or 2 cases in the 30 years that they're talking about that maybe a cop was involved and should be condemned. But the funny thing is, if you compare those statistics to Indigenous people in their own goddamn communities, they are way more likely to die from the same causes. So, but if you're really worried about the Black lives and you want to do anything to protect them, then locking them up in jail is going to protect them. I'm not saying we should lock them all up in jail, because that is actually wrong. But if your argument is we need to protect the Black lives at any cost, then jail is actually protecting them.
Yes. Now, one of the things that I have been struggling to comprehend in my mind, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot. And the thing is with this thought is it ebbs and flows how I take it on board. And I try and be introspective with my own thoughts and not being in that environment. But the incarceration rate for Indigenous people in Australia is far higher than everyone else. Now, why is that? Is that because where they come from? Do they see their uncle in jail? Do they see their dad in jail? Is it a bad environment that they're in? Do they not see the ability to go and find a quality employment and get out of that shithole? Is it because there are a lot of people, for example, in Western Australia, the Northern Territory, in rural areas that live basically 100 years ago? They live in that old environment, and all they have access to is enormous amounts of homegrown alcohol and drugs and shit like that, and they don't have the ability to bring themselves out of this hole that they are in. Now, is that the case? Is it a cultural thing? Is it this war against white people that seems to exist between Indigenous and white people, which is very unfortunate? Is it real racism?
I don't actually think there's that. I think the war is much smaller than is portrayed. I think it's a lot of white people that are making it. Yeah,
absolutely.
Because funnily enough, I've from that video, I've received heaps of messages from Aboriginal people that support it.
Yep. Because they just want to. They don't want to be seen as victims. That victimhood complex.
Listen, I think it's a mix of everything you're saying. And my point of that video, for example, is, why don't you protest for the cause? Why don't you target the cause? The fact is, there is a problem. Is it systemic racism? No, because the systemic racism did not cause that guy to murder. It did not cause that guy to abuse a child or beat his wife. Like, it didn't cause that. Systemic racism is the biggest scam. There's good studies in the States, especially because I actually worked in South Jamaica, where 50 Cent and Ja Rule are from. And it's interesting because you go there and you see shitholes. And, they use those kind of areas as examples to push this narrative of systemic racism. But there have been studies which show that there are certain groups that live in those areas that actually do better than, so African groups that do better than white people in other areas. And what the point of the study shows is that it actually had nothing to do with specifically where you lived. It had to do with your culture, your upbringing. So these were conservative kind of Africans they happened to be, I think they were very Christian and whatever. And they thrived because for them, education was important. And, the whole system of the family values was important. And they thrived. They did well, whether they stayed in the neighborhood or moved out. So when it comes, I would say the biggest contributor to those stats is culture, and the fact that the rest of society, pushes them, encourages victimhood and victim mentality, and give. Like, at what point do we stop? At what point do we say, all right, take some personal goddamn responsibility? Like, no one made you do all those things. No. I still think white people should apologize just because I like it. It sounds cool. But it's personal responsibility. And I think that if we encourage that, you will see these cultures change. But whilst we allow it to happen and we encourage it, why would they change? If you get everything given to you, the more you complain, the more you blame everyone else, the more we give you, the more we're sorry. Why would anyone change? Think about a child. If you do that to a child, if you have a kid and instead of getting him in trouble for his naughty behavior, instead you go, oh, I'm so sorry that I treated you, I punished you this morning. I didn't give you dessert last night. It's my fault that this morning you stole an ice cream from 7-Eleven. Like, that's not how it works. That's not how you encourage good behavior.